On today's episode of Out Loud and Laughing,
I think drag queens are innately political. And I always make the joke in my show. I know that there's people who identify in the Republican Party. There's people who identify with the Democrat Party. I identify with the Cocktail Party. And I diffuse that and try to make it so that everybody does feel welcome. But it's very hard. I'm sure we'll talk about this later. But as a drag queen, I do feel like it's a huge responsibility to fight to retain queer spaces, to make them safe, to make sure everyone, including our trans community, persons of color, artists of color, of course, drag queens, are all seen and honored and safe.
welcome to another episode of Out Loud
And Laughing.
Get ready.
I'm Bryan.
And Jon, two gay cousins having big talks and even bigger laughs. Join us. Let's see what they're up to. It's Out Loud and Laughing.
Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud and Laughing. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jon. And it's awesome to be here. And Bryan, it's so good to see you.
Yes.
And for our viewers, we have a third face with us today. And we are just so we're so excited. If you have ever had the privilege of visiting Wilton Manors, Florida, which is an epic oasis of beautiful people doing beautiful things. It's an LGBTQ community located in South Florida. If you've ever had the chance to grace its beautiful clubs with amazing shows, you may have seen our guest today. We have our dearest friend, Eric, who is very talented, and we're going to hear a lot about the story of how he came up with this beautiful drag persona, who is unlike any drag queen I've actually ever seen before for many reasons. Live singing, the heartfelt sort of passion that goes behind all of the performances. So with no further ado, hi, Eric.
Hi. Well, I feel like I can't say anything else after that kind of an intro. What more can I?
That's it. Thanks for coming, everybody. Eric, we really love that you were here today.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's very sweet. I'm so glad you gave a little shout to Wilton Manors, because it is indeed a magical place of just, I feel like we're in this beautiful golden age of Wilton Manors, of just all these artists are here. The shows you can go to are free of charge, which just blows my mind. And any given night, there's 3 to 4 shows happening at any given cabaret space or bar. And it's just, it's a special time. I feel like it's only a matter of time before we enter that P-Town phase of like $20 a ticket and reservations and things like that. I hope we stay this way for a little while longer, because it's just as you said, it's this beautiful breeding ground of artistry and people just trying things out at risk-free to the artists and seeing what works, what sticks to the wall. And it's really fun to watch.
I love that you called it breeding ground first. So thank you. Also, I completely agree, because like I've lived in New York. Jon's obviously lived in San Francisco, and Wilton Manors is so community-based, walkable. It's so like you can literally go to so many different places at once. And so I agree. I hope it does stay that way.
I hope it does. And there's people fighting to keep it that way as long as we can. You know, of course, gentrification happens and priced out and things like that. Unfortunately, that's just, you know, the world we live in. But there is the great community of leadership that's really trying to hang on to these buildings that were built in the 50s and, you know, make them, preserve them historically, preserve these spaces and queer spaces, and really, really hang on to that as long as we can.
You're spot on, and I really love that the community is really focusing on preserving that. It's really important that we continue to build queer spaces, especially given the trajectory of the world today. And sort of using that as a springboard, I really want to dive into, you know, how you got to where you got to. And what I mean by that is your beautiful drag persona, Miss Bouvier. I really want to talk about her today and all the work that you've done with her. So first and foremost, who is Miss Bouvier and where was she born? How did she come about?
That queen. She is She's a product of, she's the pandemic pivot. I mean, if the pandemic pivot had a poster child in my life and dictionary, it would be Miss Bouvier, because before COVID, I was so happy I ran a theater company for 10 years in the city of Detroit. We were producing all kinds of free programming in the park. I mean, 3,000 people were coming to these productions because they were free of charge, and the city was financing them and employing artists. And I was very happy in that life. And I had a fantastic group of artists and a team that I just wouldn't have traded for the world. Well, then the pandemic hit, and as it did with many theater, small nonprofits, we would consider ourselves a small, which means a budget less than $1 million. For many of the small ones, we just didn't make it out. You know, we hung on as long as we could. But then we started getting the emails that funders were diverting money, you know, for mortgage bailouts, and they were diverting money for vaccination education, and they were diverting money away from the small organizations that really, you know, a $10,000 check was a lifeline for us. It doesn't seem like a lot of money, but in that day and age, it really was. In a city that was formerly bankrupt. You know, Detroit had filed bankrupt when we were in our second or third year of production. So, I mean, I remember where they were like considering selling the art collection at the DIA to like bail out the city. It was like that serious. So then the pandemic hit, and I had reached a point in my artist career where I hadn't been on stage much. I was in the job of producing a lot of art for other people and lifting up other artists, which I love. That's the teacher in me. And I just did a little vanity project just before the shutdown, before we knew what was going to happen. And it was the creation of Miss Bouvier. And I did this one woman show, which really focused on her backstory. The premise was everybody came into the theater and they were in my dressing room, and it was before a show. And so I sat at the vanity and just told these sort of charming Southern stories about how Miss Bouvier came to where she is that day. And then the show closed. It sold out. Show closed. And then that was on Saturday. And Monday morning, the world was shut down. And so it was just before the global shutdown happened. And then I sort of sat on my couch for like 3 weeks. And, you know, my husband was a medical professional. So he was working and certainly was busy. But he came home one day and was like, okay, you like so need to shower, and you like need to figure this out. You need to do thing. And I just like did a Facebook Live as Eric. And I was like, I just don't know what to do. And, you know, I'm feeling like I want to do something to help people. And somebody commented, I should do a weekly live stream as Miss Bouvier. And so I did. Every Friday for 16 weeks, I was broadcasting as Miss Bouvier. And that was really how I honed the improv side of her, and honed the request and the patter and the things that created the looks and invested in the drag. Because when you have to do 16 weeks and do that, it was good pressure. And of course, they didn't have anything else I was doing. You know, I was at home creating. So yeah. She's just the definition of a pandemic pivot, my friends. I mean, really is.
And what a pandemic pivot she has become. And so my connection to this beautiful story for our viewers or listeners, I had my own pandemic pivot, I guess, as well, having moved to Fort Lauderdale. And during that time, I spent a lot of time in Wilton Manors, and I was so lucky to be welcomed into Miss Bouvier's family, beautiful friends, and a lot of actually the performers that grace this amazing community. And again, these free performances, I think you were a little humble in talking about them, because they are top tier Broadway level trained musician like talent. I mean, it'll blow your mind. But you know, I also heard in that story some qualities that I have noticed about you, as well as how you bring it into Miss Bouvier. those were the tenacity of making something really beautiful during a really dark time. You always bring this spirit of hope and positivity to your shows. What parts of Miss Bouvier showcase you? You know, that you think, or yeah, we'll go there.
That's such a crazy sort of complicated question when I think about it, because I think with any drag artist that you talk to, there are aspects of them that are in the drag. The easy out for me to say would be, obviously the voice is mine. You know, I don't alter anything when it comes to the character of it, really, especially when I sing, because it's Eric that has the training, not Miss Bouvier. And so I make sure that's the voice that I'm singing in a healthy way. When you sing, you know, 3 shows a week and they're 3 hours each long, and it's just you have to really make some good vocal decisions and take care of that, because that's the moneymaker in a lot of ways. So that part is me. The sense of humor, I think, is me. I sort of like to think of Miss Bouvier as this. When I'm her, I'm channeling something else. I sort of do give way to Eric, because people, in a funny way, they weren't responding to this. You know, I used to play piano in a dueling show. I've done theater, and I always got, you know, high accolades and good praise, but nothing to the level that Miss Bouvier has brought me. And so, you know, the humbleness kind of comes back from Miss Bouvier, because, you know, she's like, watch it, because we'll take it away, girl, you know.
Yeah,
Humble in a way, and I keep her in shape. And I have to view, it sounds weird to talk about her in a third person and externally, but she is in a closet right now. She's not on. And that, you know, when I put her on, then I have to resign myself to whatever she's going to do for that show, because there is a forfeiting. I think there's this really interesting quote I heard, which is vulnerability is the threshold of creativity. And I love that like to put myself, Eric, as vulnerable in the hands of Miss Bouvier allows for creativity to happen. And there are times people come up to me. I know this sounds so funny, but they'll come up to me like, I love when you said this and you sang this. And I was like, I did. I had no, I really did. I said, it sounds like nothing I would say. That sounds great. I'm so glad I met somebody, you know, not to trivialize it, but there are times I walk away like, I know it was a great show, but you know, there's just a submission that I think you have to have. And I think a lot of the drag queens that are in my circle would agree with that. There is a certain level of like, okay, you are put away. This is now taking over. And aspects of you do show up, but you have to really, really give yourself over to the character.
That's interesting. I love the whole creativity, vulnerability statement. And it just kind of lends into, like, you've been doing this for a while now, right? Like, it's, you know, the pandemic, I was talking about it today. I think the pandemic is now almost 5 years ago. Like, kind of crazy.
Wow.
Time is so mean. But now that you've been doing this, you've obviously had really high moments, and, you know, there's probably been a lot of fears because you're putting yourself out there. Even though it's a persona, it's still, like you said, it's you, it's your talent, it's your voice. So what have been some of your biggest kind of fears and worries when doing this, both from a performance standpoint, but I would also even just love from like just a community standpoint? Like, there's a lot of hatred out there too. So like, what have been some fears that you've encountered?
Okay. So, I mean, aside from the general fears of, you know, like keeping my voice in shape and understanding that, you know, we live in also a seasonal area, which means that, you know, was to say that Mother's Day to Halloween, there's a lot of people leave this area, which it can be a financial hit. So fears of like keeping revenue streams going and making sure that's there. Of course, those are practical fears, but emotional fears are certainly something that I don't think ever subside. And, you know, saying the wrong joke or trying the, you know, or worse over, you know, I think drag queens are innately political. And I always make the joke in my show. I know that there's people who identify in the Republican Party. There's people who identify with the Democrat Party. I identify with the cocktail party. And I sort of, I diffuse that and try to make it so that everybody does feel welcome. But it's very hard. I'm sure we'll talk about this later. But as a drag queen, I do feel like it's a huge responsibility to fight to retain queer spaces, to make them safe, to make sure everyone, including our trans community, persons of color, artists of color, of course, drag queens, are all seen and honored and safe. So there's a fear in that, because when you stand in the spotlight, you're going to cast a little shade. And you have to kind of be okay with that a little bit and know that you're not going to make everyone happy. I think that's probably one of my greatest fears. With the community, this community here, I could not have picked a better place to try things out, because it's so ridiculously supportive, and they give, like, if you want the feedback, you can ask for it. And there's people who, I won't name drop, but there's some people who had massive careers in New York and in this industry who've retired here that give such great insight. Like, oh my gosh, you've got to try this. You really should be doing this. And I saw this girl do this 28 years ago, and you could totally do that stuff now. And da-da-da. You have to kind of be open to that. And that is scary as well. There's a fear in that, of taking on what people have seen work before doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you now. So you have to kind of figure out, how can I make that my own, and how can I put my own spin on that? So certainly the creative parts that are very, very full of fear and rooted in it.
That's such a good point that you bring up, because you, Eric, and of course taking into the character Miss Bouvier, have sort of faced a lot of these fears, and that has even included taking her off the stage and putting her onto the screen. You have so many exciting ventures, because I know you, and I get to follow you on your social media accounts and sort of everything you're working on. But with Miss Bouvier, she must have opened up so many more doors for you. I know that you mentioned nobody was sort of like, Eric was getting the accolades, but Miss Bouvier gets the ovation, right? Like, there's something
That's
about
so
that.
beautiful. That's the best way I've ever heard it described. That's beautiful.
What excites you? What's exciting you? Tell us about what you've worked on. I know I want to give you some airtime on something that I've actually not talked to you too much about, so I'm interested about it. But your movie, Big Easy Queens.
Well, Big Easy Queens. So we got lightning in a bottle. Like, it was so random. I have a writer that I work with. His name is Robert Leloup, whom has my whole heart. He wrote that first show that I talked about, that premiered in just before the pandemic. So he's been with me this entire journey, and he's written a lot of my jokes, my toasts, and the shows, the murder mysteries I've done. And he was in town writing a murder mystery for me. And he had this Zoom interview, and it was for Lifetime. And it was to be a screenplay writer. They wanted him to do either for Lifetime or Hallmark. I can't remember which one, but it was a Zoom with some major producer. And he went in the room, and he came out, and he didn't get it. He knew that, like, when you have a Zoom meeting or an interview, and you're like, this is not for me. This is not going to go. And he came out and he went,
Yeah.
You know what? You should do a movie. And I was like, okay. And I'm not kidding you. 2 months later, I met Erin. I was at a theater meeting, and she was like, oh, I do film. And I was like, can I buy you dinner? And so 2 days later, we bought her dinner, and we pitched her this movie. And she was like, yeah, can you send me a script? And we're like, yeah, we'll get that right over to you. We had no script, by the way. We had no script. And he wrote this screenplay and sent it over to Erin. Erin signed on like the next day. She thought, oh my God, this is hilarious. It blends comedy, drag. She called it the next Rocky Horror Picture Show. And then later, the critic actually professionally called it that, which I was like, and we got investors within like 6 months, and 8 months later from that moment, we had filmed the movie. It was like, that never happens, to go from like idea to film to funding to concept to on the editing floor. And it just happened. And we got lucky enough to have Susie Toot in the film before she now has risen to fame as a season 17 contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race. So we coming
Amazing.
after the movie release, when you do indie films, you sort of release it. They go through this whole film circuit and you win your, best picture, best makeup, and you do, Schenectady Independent Film Festival, and you do Piedmont, North Dakota. You do thank you, anything that will take, and you win your awards, and then you sort of bank on it, and then you go to your distributors, and you have sort of all these awards. Well, we kept it a little bit longer because we knew Susie was going to be on the show. We didn't know how she was going to do. Obviously, she couldn't tell us, but being on the show alone is already a huge thing. Of course, now it's public information. She made it to the top 5, and then she's now the second highest grossing RuPaul's Drag Race competitor on that season. She, second only to the winner.
Amazing.
So now we are, I can't say which streamer, but it's going to a streaming platform that's pretty major, and I'm very excited about that. And we hope that we'll be able to announce in time for Pride where it's going to land. But it's filmmaking is a slow roast. And so just getting to that point has been very exciting. And now we're there. And it's just like, again, that like vulnerability, like just allowing yourself to just go with it. What an impact it's had, on my career and everyone else's career, not just mine. Aaron gets to have a feature film on this major streamer, and Susie Toot is Susie Toot, and Varla Jean now has a major distro deal in the works. It's just, it impacted so many people, and I'm very, very, very proud of that.
I mean, thank you for sharing. It sounds like you're busy. You're busy, performing. You're busy with the movie, which is so great. But how do you find time? Because I also want you to talk a little bit about stuff you're doing in the community in Wilton Manors around philanthropy and stuff. And so how do you weigh the ambition to be a star, which it sounds like you're very much on the fast track there, but then also caring about your core community and doing that as well? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, in this political climate, it's been pretty easy to choose what I have to care about, especially with all the anti-drag legislation and the attitude and pulling funding from the Kennedy Center because of a drag queen. And so I focused a lot on the state. I was a major leader in the opposition to SB 1438, which was the statewide anti-drag law here. That got overturned. And then I've been working a lot with Naples. So it's not just my community as well. There's how do I say this without feeling, I don't want to feel insensitive at all, but my community here in Wilton has many soldiers and generals that are fighting. There are places like Naples where it's a fraction of the number of people who are standing against the opposition. And so where I can lend my voice in those communities, I really, really try my best to do that. Also, while, keeping my marriage, having date night and trying to keep a life that is personal to me. Because I saw somebody, who was it? It was on an Oprah, one of the Oprah shows, and I can't remember who she was interviewing, but it was talking about how my cup has to be full and my cup overflows. That's for you. But my cup has to be full in order for me to have the extra and overflow to give to other people. So I really, since COVID, I think a lot of us learned what personal time is valued at, whether that's with people who are far away, whether that's with family that's immediate. And I really try to find those things. Adam, my husband, Adam, gets to travel on some of the cruise contracts with me, but we really value when he doesn't, and we get to do the things that I don't take her with me. I can just take a boy bag, as I say, no Miss Bouvier bag, and enjoy time with that. I think that's really important for me too.
I kind of want to capitalize a little bit more on that, if I may, Eric. I've been in some of your audiences and have seen your ovations literally turn into donations. And, you know, you've raised a ton of money for the community for really, really special organizations, both inside and outside of the LGBTQ community. One of the ones that comes to mind is Gilda's Club, uh, which basically raises money for families who have family members who are experiencing cancer. And one of the things we never think about is all of the expenditures that come outside of the medical bills. And so that organization does that. And I've seen Eric raise money for them. And so, I mean, your voice, your talents, and and Miss Bouvèé, I was going to call her a character, which she is, but let's give her some grace. But, you know, I've definitely seen you go in and outside of your community doing amazing things. So, you know, don't sell yourself short. We appreciate everything you do for all the communities you get to touch.
Here.
Yeah, awesome work. And with that, you know, and having been in your audiences, I guess that's a great way to sort of set this up is, you know, a lot of the shows, and I'm not sure if you do this anymore because it's been about a year or two since I've seen you perform live, but you used to end your shows with this really powerful moment. It's resonated with me. It's stuck with me. And maybe this is why you do it, because if that is why, then it works. But you take off your wig at the very end while you're singing "This Is Me" from The Greatest Showman. It's a very powerful moment. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because in being part of the audience, you know, when you're up there doing the work, you know, I'm sure you get sort of your reaction, but being part of the audience and feeling that as a core group of the audience, something powerful happens in that moment. Can we just kind of dive into that for a little bit? And Bryan, we have to go see Miss Bouvier. I don't know what we're thinking.
So Bryan, are you in New York? Did I read that? Are you?
Yeah. I'm based in New York, but I go down a lot to Florida, so we definitely will check out your show.
Okay, I'm actually going to be in New York, June 2nd. I'm doing the Advocate Out red carpet, and they're doing a whole thing for advocacy. So I'm very excited to be up there. But so the wig removal, the wig removal is actually it's a giant throwback. And now I do end with either "This Is Me" or "I Am What I Am." Taj, it's a little bit of a throwback. There was an era of Queens when La Cage aux Folles was on Broadway in the 80s. And at the end of Act 1, the actor who plays Zaza takes off his wig, and it became an iconic moment of coming out. Not just I'm a character, I'm in this dress and I'm making fun, and of course we're having fun, but there's a man under there, there's a human. And that's what it was meant to symbolize. And in that era, it was more about being open and getting tested and helping to slow and stop the AIDS pandemic. Across the board in like Cherry Grove and the Pines, a bunch of those girls in New York and all that, they started doing that. They started removing their wigs at the ends of a show, because it was a nice way of just sort of saying, like, we're with you. It was in a way a form of uniting gay men who were dying on the daily in the pandemic. And so when I was very fortunate in my mid-20s to play Zaza, I did that. It's an iconic, it's part of the blocking. It's part of what you do at the end of "I Am What I Am." And I don't remember what compelled me to do it as Bouvier, but I just started doing it probably 4 years ago. I was in Cherry Grove. I do remember I was in New York, and I was at the Ice Palace. And I remember, I think because it was just so darn hot, it was, and I knew what it meant, obviously, but I was just like, I need to relieve. And I just like did that, and the crowd went nuts. And it made me, it reminded me about those moments. And so then I just kept it. And now it's really people, like, it's kind of cool to see as we're getting to the end. I'll say it's the last song, and you sort of see all the, like, you see the cameras go up, and you see, because they know what's coming and they film it. And so people have all this footage of the wig coming off now over the course of several years. But it truly is a throwback. It's a throwback to the 80s and La Cage aux Folles, when that was at its sort of peak.
What
For
do
some of
you?
our people who don't know La Cage aux Folles, really quickly, Brian, it's
Yeah.
it's the OG birdcage. So the birdcage is basically like a pair like a modern take of La Cage aux Folles. So for
Yeah.
context.
And this wouldn't be a gay podcast if we haven't mentioned the birdcage yet. And surprisingly, it's the first time, John.
It
Uh,
Girl, it's such a great show, and
yeah.
movie, the iconic movie with Nathan Lane and Robin Williams. It was also adapted by Harvey Fierstein, who did the adaptation for Broadway back in the '80s. So, he's had his hands on it ever since, and it's just brilliant. He did the book for that, and he's just an amazing queer icon in writing. And there's just this group of people who lived that, who lived that era. And that's not to say that we have to live in the past, but you can't really go forward until you know where you've been. And just understanding that culture and bringing that aspect into the drag culture I like to have and uphold is important to me. So it's my little Broadway nod.
I love that. What do you think is next for Miss Bouvèé? Like, and like her evolution, right? Because I look at you now that you've been doing this for like, I guess, 5 years now. I look at it like she was a freshman. Now she's a senior. So is she going to college, or is she getting knocked up and like marrying her high school boyfriend? Like, where do you see her evolution going as she matures,
Did we? Oh
Funny.
gosh. Well, I am working on another film. That's what I'm hoping. I really would love to see. I'd love to see her go in a cinematic move that's a little, I guess, a little more mature and not campy, and uphold a little bit of historic thing. This is the film that's getting developed is a period piece. It's a French, it's northern France pre-Nazi occupation, and it tells a little bit of the story of the Pink Triangle. And I own a club in this area, and sort of what that impact had on artists. Not just the Pink Triangle, but also the Brown Triangle, which a lot of people don't know about. And that was for what they dubbed gypsies or brown people, persons of color. And so the use of that in the artist community and how much art we lost because they were just slaughtered, and things we'll never see come to life because that generation was killed. So, and I'm really excited about that film. And there's a song that just was written. Adam Tilford, who is a New Yorker, by the way, he wrote all the music for Biggest Queens. He also wrote this song for me that I do in this scene in the theater. It's called American Made, and it's all these double entendres about revving your engines, and it's everything a drag queen who can sing should be singing. And he's so brilliant. I can't wait to film that scene because I just know it's gonna be a killer scene, and I'm really excited for it. So we also right now we have Susie attached to it. Ben is attached to the film, obviously pending all of the schedules and all that stuff. But the part that he's going to play was actually written for him. Robert knows him very well. So I hope we get to make this film, because I think right now it's time, especially we're seeing a lot of anti-Semitism. The use, our president used the Pink Triangle in a derogatory way, and to think that still is alive and well, much to our dismay, I think we should be telling the story about what happened then, and it doesn't go well. So we need to be telling that story.
Yeah, it's so important. And this is what I love about your work, is you've really found this perfect confluence to bring Eric forward about all the things that he cares about and the communities that he supports, and the beautiful art way that you bring artistry alive. I've learned a few things about you here today too. The owning of the theater back in Detroit explains so much. There is no way anybody is good at hair. Well, I know you have a fabulous styling team, but we should give them a plug too. But no one person is that good at performance and holding the audience and saying, like, I'm like, this all makes sense now. But with all that being said, one of the big things here at Out Loud and Laughing is giving space for people to come together and realize that it's our voices that matter. And we're very happy that you've been here, because obviously and clearly you can see that all the work that you've done has been so impactful that we just wanted to give it so much light. But how can we all be better advocates moving forward, Eric? Please give us your take on that, because I think we all need a little bit of inspiration now and again.
Well, I think it was, you have to immerse yourself in some art, whether that's visual art, whether that's cinematic art, whether that's dance or music, because I do think that those things not only teach you a certain aspect of empathy, but they do educate in a certain way of what's happening right now. If you look at a symphony's season, there's an artist who chose that season for a reason, and it's speaking to the climate of what's happening right now in politics, in your community, in the world globally. If you pay attention to some of the programmings in some of these respected, places, I think you open yourself up to paying attention and learning and understanding, seeking to understand and listening to the music or listening to the lyrics, listening to the storytelling. We storytellers have a way of feeling it and teaching it and discussing it all at once. Not necessarily politicizing. I understand that art often gets politicized. I do understand that. I do understand there's a space for that. There is a space and a time for that. But I don't know many artists who get into this business who do it to run for office or be a political anything. They do it to provoke thought, and they do it to invoke action. And whatever that action is up to the consumer, but that's why we exist in the space that we exist. So I would encourage people who are seeking any sort of way of creating empathy or action, just go to any kind of art that you desire to consume, because it's all right there and will help you feel it, process it, and call to action however it is you feel you need to do. Specifically with the arts. I mean, I say that now because the NEA is pulling all this funding.
Oh my
get rid
gosh,
of the
yeah.
NEA. And the state of Florida, they, chopped $33 million or something like that in arts funding to every arts organization in the state.
Unbelievable.
Well, you have to ask yourself, why would they, I'm saying the amorphous they, why would they target art? Well, it's because it's one of the most moving areas of invoking and provoking thought. It's definitely one of the most critical places that people go to process and learn and get motivated. So cut it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the main areas that if you could silence someone, art's a good place to start. And I appreciate you not being silent. I appreciate you advocating for yourself, for our community. And we just thank you for coming and telling us all about yourself and what you're working on, because it was super authentic, and just thank you. I would say before we close out, though, I would love for you to tell everyone where they can follow you, where they can find you, because all this plus more probably on social media and stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for just what you guys are doing for our space and online. And it's been my absolute pleasure to be here. And if people are even remotely curious and following or keeping up, it's at Miss Bouvier on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram. I'm out there. My website is missbouvier.com. I do a lot of queer space travel as well. So people who are interested in gay travel and queer travel, what that looks like. And that's not just gay men. There's huge trans following, women, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual. Everyone's welcome in a lot of those spaces. So that's all on my website, missbouvier.com. So give me a follow. I always try to follow back. I think I always like to thank them for just giving a crap about following me. Even if all you're posting is pictures about your cat, I'm just grateful you gave me a follow. So I really do appreciate that.
We love you. We can't wait to see you again. Thank you for everything, and keep being Miss Bouvier. The world needs it. We need more Miss Bouviers, and we just love you.
Thank you guys.